So hello everybody and welcome to the BIA's Brexit webinar for September 2019. I'm Steve Bates and it's a sad and historic occasion for us at the BIA because this is Laura Collister's last day. So this is Laura's last BIA Brexit webinar and she's been the driving force behind them for 3 years. So some things stay the same, but some things are changing, and I'm really sorry that it's so it's going to be lighter on jokes from here on in because Laura's been the genius behind all of the jokes, and you'll be left with my sad attempts to follow the narrative that is going on. And as you see, she's found a corker to start us off with. Please note the post-apocalyptical fiction section has now been moved to current affairs, which I think is exactly in keeping with the mood of today. 55 days to go to 31st of October. I'm going to try and break with tradition this time around and break for questions at a midpoint during the webinar. I've tried to do it as a summary of the key things to begin with, a little bit of what companies may need to think about, and then I'll take some questions and then go into a deeper dive on some of the politics and what's going on. So be ready with your questions. Please type them in if you have questions so that we can get to them sooner in this. What we plan to do on today's webinar is take you through a little bit of what's gone on in the UK, no deal, Parliament, new government parties, what's gone on from an EU perspective, and then our own BIA perspective. Some dates, I'm sure you're all conscious of dates at the moment coming forward. We have the meeting with government next week at the EU relationship group on the 10th of September, so that's the opportunity for us to bring anything up that that you guys raise with us. Parliament's going into recess next week, and then there's the conference season. In government terms, the Prime Minister and the government are focused, and the EU are focused on the European Council, 17th and 18th of October before the Brexit date. And of course, the reason why the Brexit date was set is because new commissioning takes its place at the beginning of November. I always like to remind you that we don't only focus on Brexit, and if you are from the sector going around the world, please remember that the UK as life science cluster continues to deliver astounding and astonishing developments, innovation and therapies. We always talk this book as we go out and about. Record raise in terms of finances. Sector deal shows the support of the government. The UK is the world's third global cluster with great strengths in cell and gene therapy, genomics and AI, with a great regulatory regime with a strong regulation. And if you're wondering what we're advocating for to government, the government may have changed. There may be a lot of fog in who and what's going on in Westminster. Our position in terms of what we're arguing for remains the same: close regulatory partnership, the ability to supply medicines to patients, patient safety and public health safety, access to R&D, making sure there's not red tape, enabling our sector to grow, the ability to people to move and work easily around, and continued engagement on R&D and funding. And just as we were going down memory lane, as Laura goes, I dragged out some slides from September 2016, which now 3 years ago, which, as you can see, innovation, commerce and trade, regulation and people were the ones we were on back then. And as you can see, they continue to be to this day. So we're consistent. If you're around in the next week or so, we have a fantastic regulatory innovation conference where we'll go through some of the implications of this for the regulatory environment. We'll be joined over drinks by June Rain, the new incoming chief exec at the MHRA, and I encourage you to think about joining us. And I think it will be a good discussion. Like-minded individuals, if you're at the regulatory side of the fence, and do put this one in your diary. It is at Euston Square, a couple of weeks' time. So, UK perspective. What could happen by Halloween? In simple terms, and I'm trying to cut through everything here, broadly we have 3 possibilities. First possibility is that a Brexit deal is agreed, a new withdrawal agreement happens, and we go into a transition period. The second is a no-deal Brexit, a crash-out Brexit, and the third scenario is that there is no Brexit on 31st of October. There's a further delay, and there's some points to that. I think the core thing for companies is broadly, your action depends a little, I believe, on which of these you believe is most likely. We've always encouraged people to plan for all eventualities. I know how difficult and complex that is, but it remains the same position, and we have essentially the three positions. Do you believe there'll be a deal agreed? Do you think we're going to crash out? Or do you think that there will be some sort of delay and things will happen? I think that my arrow here is pointing towards the third one. It can't be guaranteed, but I think as we'll go through in detail, I'll explain why I think it's unlikely that there'll be a deal agreed going forward. I think no deal Brexit remains possible, but the law, which I believe will go finally through both houses of the UK Parliament very soon, is likely to make that a non-lawful option very soon. So I think the chances of that happening on the 31st of October are diminishing, but not can't be ruled out completely yet. So therefore, I think we should think mostly about what might happen if there was to be a further delay. And importantly here, that's not straightforward because it has to be asked for by the UK government and agreed by the EU 27. It could be because there's a general election, and we'll go through some of the details as to how that could or couldn't happen. Or it could be because there was a second referendum, or it could possibly be that if there was a clarity that there was a no deal, that there could be in the last few days an agreement for some technical time to put in place certain things for a no deal scenario to be prepared, a sort of few days approach there. So I think that's the context in which I think companies need to operate. I've endeavoured, and this is with thanks to BuzzFeed, to try and put into one slide some of the scenarios that could happen in UK politics in the next few weeks. Here, I think we have seen the sublime and the ridiculous happen in the UK Parliament. Those of you who are regular viewers will remember many months ago where we mooted the idea that the UK Parliament might take control of the agenda from government, and we mooted that as a sort of an outlier possibility. And of course, that seems to be where we are now. We have a government without a majority. We've had a change of prime minister. These are the ones that I think could happen, and you can pay your money and take your choice on these. So much of these are whether the Labour opposition, led by Jeremy Corbyn, how they play tactically the call from the government to have an election. They may agree to an early election. I think that the money is more likely on 2 than number 1. I think it's possible that the law that's passed in Parliament at the moment could be the Prime Ministers and Michael Gove have refused to rule out refusing to abide by it. That would be constitutionally very new for the UK, but I'm prepared at this stage to put all options on for you. Another wild and wacky one is the thought that, Boris Johnson could ask another European country to veto a Brexit extension. Perhaps President Orban in Hungary has been talked about, and that would then enable him to crash out at the end of the month. The other would be that the Prime Minister would try and get around the Fixed Term Parliament Act with a new bill. That could have advantages or disadvantages. We may see that happen on Monday. Another one that I see is that they say that he could call a confidence vote in himself and then try and lose that vote, so he would have no confidence in his own government. That would then precipitate an election, or precipitate a process that could lead to an election or an alternative government. The Prime Minister could resign. The opposition could call a confidence vote. The opposition leader could become the Prime Minister as a result of a failed confidence vote in this present government, and he's able to put together an alternative government, perhaps to sign the letter asking for an extension. Government and national unity could also be called if the Prime Minister's vote of confidence was lost, and you could see a figure like Ken Clarke, the leader of the House, who's resigned from the Conservative Party, as a figure of unity. Or there may be an election in October, November, which Boris Johnson wins decisively, and therefore he has a mandate to operate. Jeremy Corbyn could win an election and he could have a mandate to operate. I haven't put on here Jo Swinson wins an election and she has the mandate to operate. Or I should have probably put that one, apologies, I was running out of space. Or there's an election and it delivers a hung parliament. I'm sorry that I'm not able to give you clarity on this. I think there are so many permutations. They are so fraught and moving hour by hour. It's not really feasible to take you through all of these in detail. I think the core point for companies is there's probably one of these three things going to happen: deal, no deal, or delay. And I think you should operate in the lights of this. And I then get asked this question: what should I do as a company? Well, I'm going to endeavour to answer that in one slide, and then I'm going to take some questions. And so please be ready with questions if you have any, because we're going to go into detail after this. I'm afraid the point is, please remain ready for all outcomes on Brexit. There could be a deal. I think it's unlikely, as we'll explain when we go through the detail. The BIA will update on that if it is done, and there would likely be a transition period, which would mean we'd have time to plan for changes, and we'll be able to explain which of those bits that are in the locker that were organised beforehand remain and which bits don't. But probably not much would change in the next month. If there's a no deal, obviously perhaps less likely if the bill goes through Parliament, but still on the table. I would encourage companies to, if they are engaged with the Department of Health medicine supply process, to remain engaged, as I know many of you have been for weeks, months and years. I'm going to explain a little bit about the heightened media and political focus on how that is operating, and I'll take you through some of that discussion around Dr. David Nichol, the discussions around Yellowhammer, Sally Davis's response, and why I think companies need to be aware that any comment on this in the media is going into a highly charged atmosphere. I think for smaller and micro companies, it's important to watch out for and engage the more general business planning. There has been a step up from the government in terms of the information and operational ability of no deal planning that's available. There may be more of it in the coming weeks, and I would encourage companies to watch out and engage. I realise it's the challenge is, should you engage against an outcome that is perhaps waning in the next month, but there are further and new opportunities to do that, which we are hoping to be part of. And don't rule it out just because they're saying, don't work on the basis that it won't happen just because of the law in Parliament. There are a couple of wheezes that the Prime Minister could use if he is insistent not to die in a ditch, as he said yesterday, and say he won't and take Britain out hell or high water at the end of October. He can use a couple of wheezes early next week to try and do that. If there is a delay or a general election or further shenanigans, which I think is where I'm leaning towards, I'd encourage companies to stay up with what's going on before you sign a check. I know we're well past the point at which people are making no regrets decisions, and people are spending money against many of these scenarios. And I share and understand your frustrations and cost, and I reflect that back forcefully to government as we continue to meet them. It really is at the moment a period of high volatility, and I'm unable to give you clarity as to what that might happen. But I think in broad terms, I'm thinking that the ongoing process here that we closely watch in Westminster leads me to think that it is less likely that there will be a deal or a no deal at the end of October, and therefore plan accordingly. I'm going to stop at that point and see if anybody has questions before we'll go into detail on progress on a deal, what progress has been, no deal, and some of the thoughts around planning. Right, bear with me whilst I battle with the technology to see your questions. I can see that there are some. So let's go to the top of those. Do we have any update either on the continuing relationship with the MHRA or the heads of medicines agencies in Europe and or with ICH? Read the latter. Can the UK become a member of ICH? I'll endeavour to answer that in two parts. So the position at the moment is the MHRA, the UK remains a member of the European Union. Of course, the European Medicines Agency have been preparing for the UK to leave against the last deadline and against this deadline. So they are operating in a way as to, excuse the parlance, show the MHRA the door by removing the leadership of files from them and such like. That was largely complete before the last deadline for the UK leaving. So in a sense, we're in an odd position where the MHRA remain a full member of the European Medicines Agency by dint of the UK remaining in the EU. But the EU, or in particular the Commission, have asked the Medicines Agency to act as if the UK will be out the door, and therefore have pushed them towards a lesser role in some of this. And in doing so, my view, have benched some of the best regulators in the continent to the detriment of the sector and the detriment of patients. That position continues. Obviously, if there were to be a deal or a negotiation, the continued future of how the MHRA may engage with the Medicines Agency or the ecosystem is one of the things that will be negotiated, and I'll endeavour to read the runes as best I can as to what the UK are asking for in subsequent answers. With ICH, I'm going to punt, and somebody may on call may be able to advise me that the UK, I think the UK can become a member of ICH, but it needs to go through a process. If we crash out of the EU without a deal, has the MHRA issued guidance on how the UK will access the EU falsified medicines database? I don't believe it has issued guidance, and I don't believe the UK will have access to the EU falsified medicines database if there is not a 5 minutes to midnight process and the databases are switched off. So I think if there is no deal, I think it is something that we have to plan on the basis it won't work, that the UK wouldn't have access to this falsified medicines directive databases. I believe if they're held by the EU, we wouldn't have access to. There's a technical question as to where the databases are held, and I can't remember with this one off the top of my head whether there is whether this is held by a subset or somebody else for the EU. But I think we would expect to see this information. I've not seen a formal submission on it. Is there more information about how the government will support British life sciences post Brexit? I think we have seen from this government early intentions, and Laura may touch on this, from the speeches that Prime Minister Boris Johnson has given on the steps of Downing Street about his vision for this. We saw in the life science in the spending round this week the recommitment to aim towards 2.4% of spending on R&D. They've had little time to get together formal policies, but my hunch is that there's quite a lot of desire to do this amongst the new administration. They are seeking and engaging with BIA members and ourselves. They are interested in, deeply interested in science and innovation. And as you can imagine, we believe there's quite a lot of thinking and preparation going for both party conferences and potential manifestos, where I think we would see how this was done. Thank you for helping me on ICHS. The UK could apply for ICH independently. Withdrawal agreement provides a transition to December 2020. Will this timeline be further extended now that given the delays incurred? I think the answer to that is no.
They can request one extension according to...
So at present, they haven't requested an extension to the withdrawal agreement process, but as they haven't agreed a process, my sense is you'd agree that when you did a deal. So at the moment, if a deal were to be done in the next couple of weeks, the present timelines would be that there would simply be to the end of 2020 to do the transition. So it'd have a shorter transition. Whether the political reality would be you'd have a longer one, I don't know. And for me, that's a subset of, is a deal likely to be done? And we've not focused on it because it doesn't look like there's much movement on much detailed movement on a deal happening. Peter is encouraging me to speculate which is worse for biopharma: no deal, further delay and uncertainty. Obviously, of course, the best case, I think, for our sector and what our sector has strongly advocated for is continued close alignment on regulation. If there were to be a recalibration of this discussion within the UK and a new democratic mandate, then there are significant benefits to the UK of access to the single market, of customs union, of a single regulator. So I think many of the companies that I know have thrived with the MHRA and with access to the single market, and it's been a strong reason for inward investment into the UK. Doesn't mean to say that the UK can't thrive in whatever scenario is presented to us. I think the strong view of members when we did a lot of work on this in summer of 2016 was that a no-deal crash out would be the worst possible scenario of all of them. Nobody is disabusing me that remains the view of the vast majority of members. I'm conscious that uncertainty is never great for businesses, but I think if there was the prospect of some of the things that the sector has wanted to be part of a Brexit deal or a new democratic mandate, that's probably preferable from most businesses' perspective than the significant disruption that a no-deal Brexit would lead to. But I realise that many businesses are also have done what they can and are ready for believe they're ready for the changes that are ahead. Okay, I think that's by and large your initial questions. I'm now going to go on to a little bit on progress on a deal, and then we'll talk about no deal, and then we'll go on to some other bits. So progress on a deal. Has there been any progress on a deal? Should you work on the premise that a deal is going ahead? And I think probably not too much. There were suggestions that Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, called this the talks a sham. A European Parliament Brexit Steering Group member described them as window dressing after being briefed by Michel Barnier. But Michael Gove said, who's the Cabinet Minister, "My hope would be that we can secure progress at the talks, which are ongoing, before October, but I can't anticipate every aspect of the future." So you can pays your money and takes your choices where you think those are going well. For a sector perspective, one of the things that we've been tracking is whether the UK's position in terms of its ask to Europe, particularly on regulation, is different under a Johnson administration than it is from a May administration. And these are from, this is an excerpt from a letter from Boris Johnson to Donald Tusk on the 26th of July. It's largely around the backstop, but I think the middle paragraph here is insightful, perhaps, of a broader approach. And this is Johnson's words. "Accordingly, as I said in Parliament on July 25th, we cannot continue to endorse the specific commitment in paragraph 49 of the 2017 joint report to full alignment with wide areas of the single market and the customs union." And we're trying to understand in our engagement with government whether the government maintains its view that it wants continued close alignment with the European medicines regulatory system, as it has also argued for chemicals and some other sectors, aviation, or whether it has a new view. And we'll be raising this question with the view that through members and with ministers in the coming weeks. So we're seeking clarity. There's no formal documentation on this, and this is from a press report from what Michael Barnier is assumed to have said, or what was reported from a meeting that he attended, which had EU ambassadors at it. He described the talks as being in a state of paralysis, that there were no new proposals on the Northern Ireland backstop, and that the UK government was seeking renegotiation in 3 areas of the political declaration. And it's a bit obtuse as to what this might be, but the key one for us was that they wanted to describe this as the future relationship as a best-in-class free trade agreement, no tariffs and no quotas, but that they were seeking for the UK to diverge from EU rules in areas not covered by the trade deal. Now, this is the reporting by, I imagine, somebody who was in the meeting of a report from one side of a meeting that took place. So it's not easy to discern, but we're trying to understand what the UK policy is and whether it's changed and whether that's important for our sector. The other thing that might be around, it seems that the UK government may be trying to tour national capitals of Europe directly and raising whether they can do any side deals on specific stuff. So we're keeping an eye as to whether mini deals are happening. We've seen a few of them on health entitlements for British citizens and residency rights. Perhaps there's the potential for these to happen, and if there were to be a no deal plan, perhaps these would emerge in the last few days. On no deal planning, I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's not only leaving today but is not feeling the best. So Laura, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for your help on this, and if you're feeling awful, do say.
Okay, just running through a few things that have happened over the last few weeks. You will have seen that the Chancellor announced extra money for Brexit, for no deal, including 434 million for the continuity of vital medicines and medical products, including freight capacity, warehousing and stockpiling. Whilst it's been available, I think there's been no further announcements about some of the specifics around it yet, but would hope to see something soon. There's also 108 million available to promote and support businesses to ensure they are ready for Brexit. The Business Readiness Fund was announced on the 29th. That was at the end of last week. That was £10 million for the organisations and trade associations can bid for to put on events for companies to help them be ready for Brexit. And BIA has put the bid in, and we hope to hear soon whether that's successful. And we'll obviously communicate to companies through our usual channels.
Yeah, and if I can, thank you, Laura. I think my intention from this is if we get this would be about the sort of general business stuff, everything from VAT to if you're importing, exporting, what it means for micro businesses. So less focused on the implications directly for medicines regulation, more about what you need to do if you're a small business, but with a life science tinge. We wait to see whether the department want to support us in providing a raft of programs. And it'll be for everybody, not just BIA members, if it were to happen.
Little update on where we are with the ferries and the planes. So the other day, Department of Health put a press release out about their express service, which is they're tendering for a contract for an express freight service for medicines and medical products. They highlighted in their press release they would only be liable for around 4 million of the total value, and would expect it to be less. The other piece of the transport tendering is the DfT framework, and on BBC's Today programme, Grant Shapps, who's the new Transport Secretary, said the DfT is actually a contract, actually an invitation to tender, but not spending a penny at this stage. So that's in complete contrast to the last preparation for no deal in March, when government secured actual ferry capacity. BIA has put out a number of statements recently where we've had the same position in terms of having extra freight capacity for medicines and medical devices in place for the 1st of November being fundamentally important for the continued supply of medicines if there is a no deal Brexit.
Yeah, and I've been on the record, and I've directly put this point to Michael Gove, that it's clear now that the process for this is less strong and less advanced from a sector perspective than we were this time 55 days out before the previous deadlines. There's no capacity yet to know how to book, where these things are, how you get on them. There were problems with this last time, and we are nearer to the deadline with a weaker process than we were before. I am frustrated about this, and I wish we were in a position to be able to give you the opportunity to say this is where to go, this is the port, these are the ferries. We are not able to. It's not for want of trying. We have been demanding and asking for this for a period of time. So apologies from the BIA's perspective, but we all know who is responsible for this, and it's not as if they don't know what they need to do.
In terms of no deal planning, the next BIA BIA Brexit Lead Network is on the 16th of September in the afternoon. It's open to all members of either or both organisations, and you can sign up on our website, and there will be an update from Department of Health around the no deal supply programme. There'll also be someone from the CBI there talking about wider business preparedness, plus potentially another external speaker, and we'll have our usual internal industry only discussion focusing on some of the key issues arising. The link to sign up to that is on the website. In terms of ports, government has announced some extra money for ports. It's only £9 million. It's not gone down brilliantly, and admittedly, the leader of the Portsmouth Council is a Lib Dem. He was highlighting, and he spoke quite extensively in the Guardian the other day about how much money they've spent and how much and how the funding that they're receiving doesn't cover much of it. And in terms of, they've been told to expect a lot of extra lorries.
And I think, Ms. Manders, if you've considered, because some companies have rerouted, and it's difficult to understand whether your rerouting will work if there are other contingencies for other sectors which are involved in this, and we don't know which ones are what this means, because obviously go from to quadruple the volume going through a port has significant capacity challenges.
And then just to summarise, there is more money, but there's not that much detail about where the money's going. We're still waiting for the ferry announcements. Have the tenders been successful? Where will they go from? How, when can you book, etc. And there's also been quite a lot of political discussion focusing on, actually, they haven't spent that much money on the ferries.
So apologies for a busy slide, but I'm going to talk a little bit here about how scrutiny of how the government is preparing for no deal is increasing both in Parliament and the media. And this is just a cut from the questions to the Brexit Secretary yesterday in Parliament. Stephen Bartley's the Brexit Secretary, but you can see quite a lot of questions tabled. It's obviously an issue that the Labour Party are pushing, and you can see the Secretary of State's rapid answer there. I put a couple of his answers, which come from Hansard from Parliament yesterday, in part because I think it shows that what the industry has done is respected and understood by members of the cabinet. So it's good to see that he is prepared to pay tribute, understands that we've been doing this over 3 years, calls out Novo Nordisk for the work that they've done, describes what the industry has done as having gone above and beyond and a huge amount of work. And in answer to another question, he understands that, that this is not just about stock and not just about flow, it's about flow both ways. The medicines go in and out of the UK. So I hope that some of the issues you've raised with us, you can see that we've raised with government, and government is is engaged in it in some detail. So there is understanding, at least, as this scrutiny is focused on it. But I think the other thing that I'm keen that the sector is aware of, that this is also becoming a heightened and sensitive issue in the broad and heightening of the Brexit debate. Valerie Vaz is the shadow leader of the House, who is the Labour opponent to Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the House. She asked him a question yesterday about Dr. David Nicol, who was part of Operation Yellowhammer. That's the government's planning for no deal. She asked when will he publish Operation Yellowhammer, and Rees-Mogg gave the following answer, essentially comparing the Dr. David Nicol to Dr. Wakefield, who was obviously the famous anti-vaxxer. This has led to a bit of a spat in the last 24 hours, and I just think it's worth going through this in detail. So this is David Nicol, who is a leading doctor, has been part of the planning of for no deal through NHS planning. He's gone public with his concerns about no-deal plans on medicine supply, less about industry supply and more about how this is then organised through the health system into patients. And he's been on TV, as you can see, describing the government's approach as winging it. He was involved in a spat, a contretemps with Jacob Rees-Mogg on a radio show earlier in the week, and his position is, his quotes are here. When the leader of the House had a go at him, this led to Sally Davis last night, the Chief Medical Officer, responding to the leader of the House. And I think this just gives an example of the heightened state that we are in. As she described, there's been a monumental effort by the government and the entire medical community to prepare for all potential outcomes for leaving the European Union. This includes prioritising the import of medicines and medical devices. She says there are now full plans in place that we believe, if enacted to plan, should ensure unhindered medical supply. So she has confidence in some of the work that we've done, which is good. But she also said questions regarding the ramification of a disrupted distribution and consequent risk to life are, however, legitimate. So, this has led to Jacob Rees-Mogg apologising. But I think you can see that when these issues around medicine supply are at the top of the news, companies should be aware. You may get asked questions about them, about your planning, about the implications of this for individual product lines. And my general advice is please be aware as to how this is an issue of concern that perhaps wouldn't normally be there. And I know companies operate very responsibly with the public and patients at forefront of mind. Please continue to do so. Laura, tell us a little bit about, take us a step back to Parliament, government and the parties.
Yeah, so I'll do this quite quickly because it's getting quite late and it's my last day. So last time we spoke, Theresa May was still the Prime Minister, and we had said that Larry the Downing Street Capt would provide some continuity. He's still there. Boris had a picture with him just to confirm it, but they do now have a dog. There obviously is a new cabinet, lots of people at it, and a great picture here which showed that they had to put an extra kids table at the end to fit everyone into the cabinet. So what does it mean? So there's some continuity at Department of Health and DEXU for us. Matt Hancock's there, stayed. So is Baroness Blackwood, who co-chairs the EU Relationship Group, and Stephen Barclay, but there's been quite a few changes. Stephen Hammond, who'd been leading at Department of Health on the medicines no-deal planning, has gone, and Chris Skidmore has come in. Robin Walker has moved departments, and Lord Callanan has taken over some of that role and will be attending the EU Relationship Group next week. Greg Clark has left, Lord Henley has left after a long run, and Michael Gove is in with a new Brexit responsibility. Early signs have been good. Boris Johnson talked about life sciences and technology in his first speech. There were the FRANS announcements. Michael Gove held a roundtable on no deal for some of the life sciences organisations last week. And we have the EU Relationship Group is provided some continuity and is taking place next week. So it's all going well, and then Parliament returned this week. Government lost its majority. Philip Lee, whilst Boris Johnson was speaking, moved to the Liberal Democrats. The Conservative whip was removed from 21 MPs, including some of those that we've just been talked about. So Stephen Hammond, who had been leading, as I mentioned, leading on no deal at Department of Health on medicines, and Greg Clark, Steve Bryan, who's a former health minister, Richard Harrington is a former business minister, Caroline Noakes was immigration. So quite a few people who had been connected to our sector. And Joe Johnson also resigned both as a minister and also as an MP. And so far, Boris has lost every vote.
So I think what you've seen is, if it was a football team, they'd changed the team, squad over the summer, brand new squad, lots of people playing in new positions. And then they've started the matches, and they are 0 for 4 in terms of this. So not good. And then to lose your brother, obviously, is quite symbolic, as he has been someone who has championed science and resigned within the last 24 hours.
So this weekend, obviously, there's been further things happening today. Boris Johnson said he would not ask for an extension. The MPs took control of the agenda, the bill within introduced, which this afternoon has just made its way through the Lords. The motion to call a general election failed, and the government is expected to try again on Monday to call another election, but that again may not pass. We had a slide here, obviously Jacob Rees-Mogg has started trending, not just for talking about doctors, but there are particularly that Joe Swinson from the Lib Dems got involved in this. We put a history one in because Steve likes history. This is from the BBC website in terms of potential things that could happen next, but we've talked through quite a lot of this already. So probably don't need to stop here. Bearing in mind,
I think it's hard to call it.
So in terms of where the Labour Party is, they said on Wednesday let the bill get through, and we will would back an election. I think this might be changing.
I think this afternoon they talked to the SNP and they said, oh, actually we want him to hold his feet to the fire, hold Boris Johnson's feet to the fire. Actually, we will hold tight and we won't call for an election immediately. So I think this has been superseded by events in the last 3 hours. But apologies, it's moving this sort of fast at the moment.
I wrote this morning. In the Lib Dems has been expanding quite quickly, along with Philip Lee, Luciana Berger also joined the Lib Dems, and they also, remembering back to the start of August, won the by-election. So this slide slightly got lost in version control. We had a nice picture of some lettuces and some watercress, which only take about 50 days to grow. But also we've been doing this for the last few webinars. What can we do in the 55 days we have left? And we are down to be able to have kangaroos and koalas.
Well, we're down to marsupials.
Yes.
Because obviously they're not fully born properly, are they? They come out as sort of little tiny weeny things, and then they have to go into the pouches before they can grow for a bit more. So so really not very much can happen. But you reckon we could get some watercress or lettuce done?
Watercress, romaine lettuce and radishes is where we'd got to.
Be very afraid when you see cress on this slide from us. Be very afraid. Right. Is the EU ready? And they said that they were ready last time round. No, on March the 8th, they said that they would be, they were still concerned. They were concerned that not everything was ready, but they would have to get ready for the last medicines crossing the EU border. Have to get ready for the documents and formalities and checks with the World Trade Organization, rules of origin requirements. I'm going to be honest and say we've not really got to the detail of much of what's come from Brussels in terms of planning this month, because we've been so focused on Westminster. Apologies. I think here it's really wait and see. There is some updated guidance. Largely the medicine stuff has come from the European Medicines Agency months and months and months ago, and most of you are aware of that. I think we are seeing some of the filling in of the dots for some of the other things as the preparations for no deal harden, and if we get some of the support to do some more detail for businesses in terms of planning, we'll do some more of it in the coming month. How about from our perspective, what are we focused on? Well, we're making sure that we are focused on engagement with contingency and no deal planning engagement. We're trying to make sure that we're providing opportunities to be ready for all outcomes. Continue to make the case for regulatory participation and why medicines are different, and there's government engagement there, and we've got an EU relationship group meeting with the new ministers on the details of this on Tuesday. We've engaged with the new Prime Minister on the sector's priorities. We are building an event for Biotech Week in September, which will enable us to engage with the EU MEPs around this. We have our lead network, this webinar, and our website, BIABrexit.org. So, you want to do this one? Laura, you're very near the end now. We've worked you right to the death. It's 5:15 and you leave at 5 o'clock.
So in summary, we've got some clarity on the no-deal preparations, but I think this is the previous version.
No, we have got, okay, let's keep going. On our website is all the stuff that we have collected from our sector, our presentations and our members only briefing. Do look at that if you want more detail. Reminder of the Reg conference in a couple of weeks' time. If you're in the Reg world, we'll have some really insightful discussions with many of the leaders of the MHRA. June Rain, Ian Hudson, other leading figures will be joining us. Great insight from industry, lots of people who are all over this, and we'll look at the implications for this, but hopefully go beyond Brexit to look at how we can deliver capability for clinical trials in an evolving and modernising world. I'm going to stop again and see if there's any more questions. I realise I'm keeping you to 4:45, so if you're able to. Please point out that the Readiness Fund will not provide cash to companies. That is exactly right. So the Readiness Fund will is available to organisations like us to, we hope, to be able to put stuff on, hopefully with a consortia from around the country to enable us to do more. It's not one that companies can bid for if you need one, but we'll endeavour to do that. And I'm delighted that people do enjoy the effort that Laura's put into what you can do in 55 days. With that, I think I'm going to say I hope to see you soon at one of our events. We're in Stevenage next week. We have our lead network the week after and the regulatory conference. And in the run-up to October 31st, on October 17th, we have our Bioscience Forum where we'll be joined by Nicola Blackwood, the Minister for Life Sciences. Next Brexit briefing webinar is a bit dependent on what happens. So I think it's stay tuned. And with that, I want to thank you for participating and close by thanking Laura for all her hard work over 3 years. She goes on to much greater things, setting up a key function for Smith & Nephew in Europe. She goes with all our thanks. I know many of you are delighted that and valued her help and support down the years, and we'll miss her. But Brexit will go on, but Laura goes on to much better things, enabled to exit from Brexit. Thank you very much.